Hey, this is David Blakeslee talking to you about some recent releases from Kino Lorber. I'm going to be doing a little mini-series on world cinema, some titles that come from outside of Europe, outside of Hollywood, even outside of Asia. Just looking at some different perspectives on film, both some recent releases and some films that go back a few years. You may hear a little bit of music in the background, and that is the title screen for a couple films from Djibril Diop Mambéty, The Little Girl Who Sold the Sun, and FRANC. So this is the first of this series here. I want to talk a little bit about Mambety. He's a pretty interesting filmmaker. On the back of the disc here, on the liner notes, it says, "A towering figure in world cinema." Well, with all respect, I mean, he did 2 feature films and 5 shorts, so I don't know that towering figure in world cinema is quite the most accurate description, but that's largely because he didn't live very long. He passed away when he was 53 years old, and as an African filmmaker from the nation of Senegal, his resources were probably pretty limited. He is clearly most famous for this film, TOUKI BOUKI, from 1973, part of the World Cinema Project that the Criterion Collection put out several years ago, and then they released this film as a standalone Blu-ray as well a few years later. And this is the one that really put him on the map and is still kind of the go-to Mambety film if you really want to start kind of getting familiar with his work. These are the 2 last films that he ever made, and they're actually kind of billed in reverse order here. FRANC from 1994 is the first part of a planned trilogy, Stories of Little People is what it was called, and then The Little Girl Who Sold the Sun came out in 1999, and was the second installment of that trilogy, and the 3rd film never got made because he passed away in a Paris hospital at the age of 53 when he was receiving treatments for lung cancer. But these 2 films, each about 40-45 minutes long, do make a pretty satisfying pair if you're looking at how they fit together. The trilogy, as I said, had in mind apparently looking at the lives of hard-pressed people coming out of kind of an urban poverty situation in Africa, in Senegal, in the capital of that nation, Dakar. These are young people also with very significant physical handicaps. Let's start with a title feature. Okay, so there you see this beautiful picture of this young girl with kind of bright yellow sunglasses on. The character's name is Sili, S-I-L-I, and she is a girl with a very significant handicap. Her legs are basically not functional. She has to get around on crutches. She also has a grandmother who's blind and kind of makes money, if you will, singing in the public squares, and it's a very hand-to-mouth existence for sure, very precarious. She takes it upon herself to start selling copies of a newspaper, a daily paper called The Sun. So that's what The Little Girl Who Sold the Sun is referring to. And it is a very affirming, heartwarming story of a young girl's perseverance and persistence and dedication to overcome the obstacles that life has dealt her. Similarly, FRANC is about an older man. He doesn't have physical handicaps in the same way, but he's certainly hard-pressed and poor and behind in his financial obligations. He has this little box. It's a musical instrument. It's like a big kind of wooden or cardboard box with a hole in it, and you can play it by tapping on these little hacksaw blades. But even that is confiscated because of his debts. He owes money to his landlady. He lives in a very poor little shack, and he has a handicapped friend He's a man of very diminutive stature. Basically, his body just did not kick in to grow, and so his whole stature is somewhere like in this range, right? So his legs, his arms, everything is just very compressed, and they're partners of a sort. And the dwarf, I guess I'll call him that, is a pretty scrappy dude. And they have a very interesting symbiotic relationship. But le franc, of course, is the French currency. This has to do with some of the economic situations that were happening when Senegal, coming out from under the shadow of French colonialism, the franc was devalued, and all of a sudden whatever little money these people had was instantly kind of like cut in half, and life became very difficult because of some economic policy decisions that were made from the higher ups a different continent away. And so both of these films talk about perseverance and resolve and just commitment to make it in a world where the odds are definitely against you. These are two films that I feel are illuminating, eye-opening. Ultimately, they are heartwarming and life-affirming, but they also show the just the challenges and the intense difficulties that so many people have to work through and around and up and under and over and any way they can to make it, just to simply survive. So I'm going to show some trailers and tell you a little bit more about the disc as you get a look at what these films are all about. All right, well, that was a pretty brief little trailer, I have to admit. I hadn't even watched it before I started this review. This disc also does contain a couple commentary tracks. The scholar's name is Bukari Sawadago. He's a PhD. He is an African man, as the name perhaps implies. And he does give you some background, some context, some insight into Mambety's career. There are significant portions of the films where he's just quiet. He lets the film play out and he'll interject some comments, which is fine. I certainly understand his respect for the material. I also feel like maybe he could have filled some of those spots in with just additional information. He seems a little bit on the quiet side, if you will, for a film commentator. I'd like to learn as much about Mambety as I could. And there is also about a half-an-hour documentary. It's called Cinema is Magic, which is kind of about his life, his career, a lot of quotes from the director. It does give you some information about him and his approach to life and why he made his films the way that he did. So if you want to get into African cinema, if you want to find an accessible point of a man who is clearly making films, at least with an eye towards Western audiences. This was not entertainment purely for domestic consumption, although I'm sure he was speaking to his own culture and his own people and nation. But these are accessible, and in that 40 to 45 minute runtime, it's very easily digestible. And there's all kinds of beautiful shots of the cityscapes, the characters, the personalities, and just, again, the humor and the and the zest for life that motivates these characters to keep pushing forward in the in opposition, if you will, to all of the reasons and all of the pressures that might otherwise knock them down. So I recommend this disc. If this interests you, if this sounds like something that's up your alley, please do check it out. Mambety, he did a lot of other things. He was a writer, he was an actor, so it wasn't just about filmmaking for him. He went sometimes decades between making films. It was kind of part of a larger body of work that I'm not that familiar with, I have to admit. But I'd like to learn more, and this is a great introduction. Once you've taken in TOUKI BOUKI, because I think this is definitely the starting place, and it's the one that will cement his reputation for the long run.